Well, welcome back. Today we're going to take you through the early forms of colonial self-governments. And as you can see listed there, one of the major ones we're going to learn about is the Mayflower Compact. So without further ado, here we go. Obviously, we have 13 colonies that are going to be set up by England. And they're going to get their influences from a variety of places. And the first couple are going to be from ancient Greece. What we get from Greece is the concept of democracy. People go out, they vote directly on what they want, and usually a majority rules. And if the most people want it, then they get it. That's a concept that we got from Greece. Now, America isn't really a direct democracy, but the ideas of democracy we borrowed and we infuse them into colonial governments and the government that we have today. What did we get from ancient Rome? This is kind of more of a what our government came to be. So when we see the concept of a republic, what is a republic? It's when voters, which would be you, the people, you vote for or you elect representatives, then those representatives end up making decisions for you. So when we vote for senators, congressmen, House of Representatives, the president, those people end up making decisions for us. So we have what you would say in America is we have a representative democracy. We do vote, but we don't vote on everything all day, all the time. We vote for people who are representatives, and they end up making decisions for us. So that's what we kind of got from Greece and ancient Rome. We kind of put them together, the ideas of democracy and the ideas of the republic to create a representative democracy. All right. What are the influences that took place a long time ago in England and some other events and some documents that influenced the type of governments we created in the colonies or in colonial America? The first one is the Magna Carta, document signed in 1215 by the king. And what began to happen in the 1200s, 1300s, and 1400s is those absolute monarchs that you learned about, they had total power. And over this time period, they begin to lose that power. Well, if the kings are losing power, who's gaining it? The people. At this point, it was strictly the nobles, the rich, but over time, people gain more and more power, and therefore those kings will begin to lose that power. So that's one of the ideas. The second one is something in Britain was known as the Petition of Right. In writing, things have to be in writing, these legal things, because then they can't be taken away. They can't be changed. If you write them down, you can go back to it. So the Petition of Right is basically giving certain people basic rights. And one of the big ones you want to remember here is the writ of habeas corpus. Now that's Latin. So if you think of habeas corpus or the writ, think of rights, you having the rights. Habeas corpus, you might see a word in there like corpse. These are known as our bodily rights. No one can just walk up to you and kill you. If you're arrested in our country today, you have to be told what you've done wrong and you have to be given a speedy trial. These are just certain things that you should have. At times our government has taken these away, but for the most part we have them and they are without question. How do we know that? Because they are written down somewhere throughout our government. Usually can be found in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, right? The next thing that really helped us was the English Bill of Rights. It established a representative government, gave more power to the people, and set up a list of laws and things that people should have. Those things cannot be taken away because, once again, they are written down. The key is to have these things written down. So those are some events in England or some documents that definitely impacted the government we have today, right? The other big thing is the Enlightenment. So as you look at the slide here, the Enlightenment was a movement. It was an intellectual movement over in France and England and throughout Europe where people began to use their heads. They began to use reasoning, their experience to look at society. And John Locke is going to be the biggest name. If you want to make the joke, I usually say John Locke, he's the key. If you remember John Locke, you're going to be in a good place. So what did he think about? He thought about, man gets up and what's he want? And he come up with three different things. He said people are born free. They are born with these rights that are inherent, they are inside of you, and they cannot be taken away. And what he came up with is three different items. He said, what does man want to do when man gets up in the morning? You get out of bed, you want to live. You want to get up and do what you got to do throughout the rest of the day. Second thing, you want liberty. Liberty, fancy word for freedoms. You want to be able to just go and do whatever you want to do. And in the end, you want to own property. Now, in our government, Jefferson will modify this, and he will write the pursuit of happiness. But for the time being, natural rights, three things: life, liberty, and property. Second thing John Locke comes up with is the idea that the government exists only with the consent of the governed. Now, the way that's written might throw you off, so think about that. The government only exists because we, the people, allow it to govern. The power begins with the people, and we give it to the government to do whatever it is it does, to make those decisions. All right. And the last thing he kind of fantasizes and thinks about and comes up with, he's like, listen, if the government becomes destructive, if it doesn't protect my rights, if it doesn't take care of those three basic natural rights, we have a right to alter that government or get rid of that government. And if we do, Jefferson will later write, you know what, we'll create a government that actually isn't destructive, that protects our stuff. So that's John Locke. Natural rights, life, liberty, and property. Don't forget it. It's huge. You're going to need it. There's a few more Enlightenment thinkers that you want to be aware of. John Locke's going to be the biggest name, but here are the other few. Baron de Montesquieu, French guy. He felt, by looking at the king and all the power he had, that power at the top should be divided. And we're actually going to divide our government into three separate branches so that no one branch is going to be able to do too much or infringe on our rights or become corrupt. So his ideas were actually very good in terms of setting up the three different branches within our government, right? Jean-Jacques Rousseau believed in the social contract, once again borrowing from some of Locke's ideas of, hey, the government is there to protect our rights. It's like a contract. It's a legal binding agreement. If the government doesn't protect our stuff, we have a right to go against that government. And the final guy, another French guy, Voltaire, he comes up with the idea of freedom of speech. He basically said that the government can't infringe on our right to say what we want to say. We should be able to worship how we want to worship and even maybe write things in a newspaper. Now, later on, those will be challenged. What you say needs to be true. And you can't obviously say something that would cause harm to another human being. So there are going to be some limitations, but in the beginning, just think of Voltaire as the freedom of speech guy, and we're going to be able to say what we want to say, right? The colonial experience, basically the political rights and mercantile relationships with Great Britain, kind of showed us or taught us who we are as a people, and these feelings kind of murmured throughout the colonies, and everyone was pretty much thinking these things. So what really shaped, I'll call it the American way of life, obviously these things were shaped during the colonial period. The political ideas based on English experience and the Enlightenment thinkers influenced how colonial people thought and influenced how we began America and what we were thinking. The other thing is we were 3,000 miles away from the king. We had a sense of independence, and we felt we could do whatever we wanted to do. So what did we do? We gained charters from the king. Now, I mean, a charter is an agreement to allow colonial people to settle. So it was permission from the king, and that'll come a little later on in the slide. But 12 of the 13 colonies had these things. They had permission from the king to go over and set up a colony. All right, what is it? It's the legal authority for a company or an individual or group of people to go over to the New World to begin a colony. Most of these colonies eventually will be taken over by the king. He will send over a royal governor to keep an eye on things, but in the beginning, he just gave the permission, people came. After getting that permission, most of the colonial assemblies, the little governments they set up, were self-governing. They made their own rules, they made their own laws, and they were practically happy with that, especially because they were 3,000 miles away from the king. So they're pretty good with that. There is this feeling that there should be limits on our government. And this is something that became embedded in colonial thought. Based on those ideas of the Enlightenment, the government should not be able to do whatever it wants to do. So some of those limits, right? Basically just the idea that a government should be limited or should have limits. They believed in that. And they believed the government existed, once again, to protect our rights, to protect people's rights. Um, the biggest rights obviously came out of the John Locke theories that men are born with life, liberty, and property. So I'm giving that to you twice here because it is very important, right? The other thing that the colonists believed in, that the government shouldn't really get in the middle of a deal you make with another person. And when you make deals with other people, there's usually something written down, something that's signed. I'm setting you up here. What are those things called? Contracts. If you sign a contract with another person, the colonials thought that they had the right to do that. Here's an agreement. I'm going to do something for you. You're going to do something for me. They may exchange services. It might be an exchange of a service for money. But they fully believed that the government should allow for contracts to happen. Later on, that will be challenged, and the government kind of has to agree, hey, if you have a contract, then both sides need to fulfill whatever they said they would. So enforceable contracts. The last thing that they kind of hit on during this period was freedom of the press. If you do not know what the press is, we're talking the newspapers, the magazines, the things you pick up on the in the racks, and you read about the local news. All right. Colonials felt that they should be free to write what they wanted in their newspapers, and that's going to be challenged, right? They believe that the government should limit that. They shouldn't control it. They shouldn't cut things out of a newspaper. You should be free to write whatever you want. The problem with that is a German immigrant. You got to know the guy. His name was John Peter Zenger. He was writing in his newspaper about the king's royal governor. This is the king's boy. The king sent him over here to keep an eye on things. John Peter Zenger is writing stuff about this governor in his newspaper. He was arrested. There's this big trial and a lot of hoopla. And what comes out of this is what Zenger printed was true. So, I mean, right away he's found not guilty. Because of this early trial, we get an understanding, or we come up with an idea that we have the freedom of the press. You can write things in a newspaper. The only caveat is they better be true. And as long as you're doing that, you should be okay, right? So what is it? It led to our understanding of the freedom of the press. Talked about freedom of speech, freedom of the press. These ideas were embedded in colonial thought. They figured they should have these things. When they're taken away, there's going to be some problems. So the last little bit here, we're going to talk about the contract theory of government. The first one of the many ones that you should know, is the Mayflower Compact. In 1620, in Plymouth Colony, the colonists consented to be governed by a government they themselves created. It's an example of self-government. It's an example of majority rule. I know that in class we may have referred to this as representative government or representative type democracy. Any one of those things fit. Over in Connecticut, they had the same type of thing. Later on, in 1639, this is just another example of colonial self-government, the fundamental orders of Connecticut. The first one you probably learned about in class, or if you remember, this happened in 1619, and this was in Virginia. They started the colony in 1607. In 1619, a few major events happened, one of which is slavery is introduced to the Virginia colony, and the other is they began building a government. The colony began to grow. They were successful farming their tobacco. Indentured servants were coming, so they needed some rule. And what they came up with is a representative government called the House of Burgesses. A burgess is a representative. So they would elect certain people, a burgess. These burgesses would get together. They would make rules for the entire colony in Virginia, which was growing massively, and everyone agreed that they would follow the rules. So it's an example of a representative democracy. I know we've mentioned that before, but we've mentioned self-government, representative democracy. These are the things you want to be thinking about when you're looking at early forms of colonial governments. Okay. In New England, they call them a little something different. The New England colonies met at things called town meetings. In those town meetings, they made decisions to govern themselves. And once again, the town meeting, the House of Burgesses, the Mayflower Compact, these are all simply examples of self-government. And if you can remember that about early colonial governments, you're definitely going to be in a good spot. All right. The last thing we need to look at is separation of powers. When you look at most of the colonial charters, most of the colonial governments, they actually divided their government into three different branches: a legislative branch, an executive branch, a judicial branch. Let's talk about the three. The legislative branch makes the laws. The executive branch is usually the guy or girl running the place. And there's got to be some sort of judicial branch or court that you went to if you broke the law. And most colonial governments had all three. When we look at the formation of our government, we have all three. So we'll deal with that in some later chapters here. The other thing is, since the king was appointed, the king actually appointed the governors, and the governors appointed the judges. The people really didn't have a say in the judicial branch and the executive branch. They had the most say in the legislative branch, where they had a say in the laws that were being created for themselves. Once again, self-government. So the part of government those colonials were pretty much happy with is going to be the legislature that they themselves had a voice in. So as you go through, you want to remember early forms of self-government. You better know who John Locke is and natural rights. Look back on your sheet and go over the major Enlightenment figures such as Montesquieu, Rousseau, and Voltaire. Keep in mind Peter Zenger and that early court case led to our understanding of freedom of the press. And just once again, know those early forms of self-government. So hope this helped you, and we'll see you for the next one.